Hello. If you're watching this screencast, it means you want to learn a little bit more about logos, one of our three appeals that we've been learning about. So here we go. What is logos? Well, of course, Spock from Star Trek made logic famous, but what is logos in terms of making arguments and appealing to your audience? It is an appeal to logic or reason. The Writing Commons website, of course, you have that. You have a link to that resource on the PLT page of my class website, but they define it as the consistency and clarity of the argument. So it's all about the argument. And logical arguments must match the values of an audience in order to be effective. Arguments are based on assumptions, and if your audience does not share your assumptions, then they will not accept your logic, and therefore your logic will not be accessible to them or accepted by them. So here's the parts of logical reasoning, and because of this, logos among the three appeals is probably the hardest and most complex to understand, so you may not get it this first time around, but stay with me. So the three parts of logical reasoning are, first of all, the claim. That's the argument or position that you're taking. The reason, kind of the because of your argument. We'll get to an example in just a second. And then the assumption. It's an underlying and often unstated value that justifies your claim and reason. So let's see this in action. Okay. Oh, by the way, note for college-bound students, that should be all of you. These three things combined, the claim, reason, and assumption, make up what's called the enthymeme of the argument, kind of the general structure of the argument that you're making. Just a little side note. Okay, so let's get to an actual example. Okay, here's an argument. A man with his pregnant wife in the back seat is speeding to the hospital. He is pulled over by the police. He should not get a speeding ticket because he needs to get his wife to the hospital. The claim is this: he should not get a speeding ticket. The reason is the because part of it. Remember, because he needs to get his wife to the hospital. Now, I think in general, for a lot of us in the real world, that makes sense, but there is an underlying unstated assumption here, and that is that a hospital is a better place to give birth than the back seat of a car. Socially speaking, most of us generally accept without argument that pregnant women and pregnant couples speeding to the hospital get a pass when they're speeding. So this is the assumption that kind of supports this argument, and it goes unstated. This is still illegal, though, regardless of whether you have a pregnant wife or not, even logically. Okay, so here's another example that may apply more to the American Dream papers that we're writing. Okay, so let's read this. This country still suffers from inequalities in incarceration rates and public school funding, making it impossible for millions to achieve even modest levels of success. For these reasons and more, the American dream remains an illusion in modern society. So that's a little bit more sophisticated argument, and it applies to the papers that we've been writing. So here's the claim. The American dream remains an illusion in modern society. I think many of you are making a similar claim in the thesis statements of your papers. The reason for this, at least according to this example, is that it is impossible for millions to achieve even modest levels of success. And if we want to go even further, we can say due to the things like incarceration rates and public school funding. There is an assumption here, though, that's not being said, and it's this. The American dream means achieving a better life through economic and social advancement. Okay, so whoever made this argument is assuming that the audience understands the American dream to be this idea of a better life. And because of things like incarceration rates and public school funding, that better life cannot be achieved. So how to use logos? Well, you can make if-then statements. So if the American dream means a better life, then right now the American dream is an illusion. Okay, so that's logic. Not complete logic. You would have to still come up with some reasons and some underlying assumptions, but that is logic. Also, I think more obviously, and something that's a little bit easier to start with if you're struggling with this concept of logic, is the use of statistics and using them wisely to support your claim. So not just quoting statistics out of context. And in general, evidence, such as research, stats, numbers, dates, quotes, historical evidence of any kind is going to make you appear to be more logical and is going to appeal to your audience's reason. And I think the most underlying and immediate thing you're going to be thinking about over the next 24 hours is having a clear and supported thesis statement. Thesis statements, by and large, are logical statements that have a claim, a reason, and assumptions underlying them. Okay? So here are some common mistakes in logic, and we'll go more into mistakes in logic in the logical fallacies lecture, so I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but here's some of the most common ones. Conclusions that do not follow the premise. So the example from the quiz last week about the Supreme Court justices. All Supreme Court justices currently graduated from Harvard or Yale law schools, therefore you have to have gone to Harvard or Yale law schools in order to be a Supreme Court justice. The conclusion does not follow the premise, meaning that what happens in the second part of that statement doesn't necessarily have to follow from the first. Making false assumptions. So some people might read my earlier statement about the American dream and it being about a better life. They might read that as false. Some people may have different definitions of the American dream, and so they would not follow and not trust my logic. Arguing without any evidentiary support. We're going to get to some examples in just a second. That seems pretty clear to me. And then arguing things are natural, are just so. This is not logic. This is just trying to appeal more, actually, to your audience's sense of emotion. And then exaggerating claims made by the opposition. This is technically known as the straw man fallacy, which you'll see more about in detail in the logical fallacy lecture. So what this might look like in practice, some of these following statements might give you a clear example of what this actually may look like in your paper if you make a mistake. Saying things like this: it's obvious the American dream is dead. There is no debate about it. This country is in such awful circumstances, I don't know why anyone would say otherwise. Really, a lot of false assumptions going through this statement, a lot of assumptions that maybe your audience would not agree with, and plus there's no evidentiary support whatsoever to support these claims that the country is in an awful position. Another statement: it's only natural for Americans to be creative and unique. It's the way we are. Obviously, the American dream is still alive. Again, statements that say it's natural, this is the way it is, this is the way we are, it's not supported by logic. In fact, you're more appealing to your audience's sense of pride in being American, but that's not a logical argument. And then this statement: though incarceration rates are higher than they have been in the past, people who go to jail deserve to be in prison, so I don't see it as a problem. This is making a false assumption that people who are in prison are actually there because they deserve to be there, or that they've done something wrong. Excuse me. When in fact a lot of people are incarcerated for reasons that are maybe a little bit more questionable than that. So here are your key takeaways. Logos is an appeal to logic or reason, and not incidentally, it makes your audience feel smarter, so that's why you use logical appeals. Arguments typically have unsaid assumptions that allow rhetors to connect to the values of their audience. I see a punctuation mistake, so Tommy Liang, if you're watching this, I apologize. So again, your audience has to share your values in order to have the same kinds of assumptions that you have. Use of statistics and numbers is the easiest, the most obvious way to appeal to reason. That's kind of like a starter for a lot of students who struggle with this concept of logic. Using numbers, using statistics is a baseline recognition of logical appeals. Okay, so logos, it has to be reasonable, unlike whatever's going on here with this jump roping car. Thanks for watching. See you later.